Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to MOBY Mondays on a Wednesday. This is a special session of MOBY, Marketing Opportunities in Business and Entertainment, brought to you to bring out the month, which is Women's History Month, in a powerful way. This is the MOBY Women in Advertising segment, and for a week long, we are featuring leading women in the advertising industry, power hitters. Tonight, we have our creatives. And before we get started, before I introduce you to our moderator tonight, I'd like to first again welcome you and to tell you just a little bit about MOBY, which was founded in 1992, which means we're very close to 30 years of providing a platform for mostly African American professionals to share case study examples of their successes so that others might learn and accelerate their growth, both in business and in the corporate world. Because there are corporate people that are looking for people just like us who have the expertise, the experience, and the knowledge to help them meet their business goals and a return on investment. So that's why MOBY was created, Marketing Opportunities in Business and Entertainment. And tonight, since it is Women's History Month, I am featuring tonight a wonderful woman who was the first African American woman to own her advertising agency. Her name was Barbara Proctor, and the name of the agency was Proctor and Gardner Advertising. This woman was a Chicago iconic figure and an international marketer who was credited with bringing the Beatles to America. A little known Black history fact and a wonderful, powerful fact that our culture influences everything, as the Beatles said, and that our culture has an eye and a feel for what will work in this country and throughout the world. So to Barbara Proctor, we thank her for her career, and I'm just going to give you a few highlights. Um, I have actually worked for Barbara for a little bit, and she did everything from interviews with C-SPAN 20 years ago to working for major iconic brands like Illinois Bell. Uh, she did some work with uh, Ronald Reagan. He shouted her out during his State of the Union address. She hired many of the professionals that went on to work at places like Burrell Advertising. And she was a dear friend of Vince Cullors, who deserves to be mentioned this week as well, who had the first Black ad agency in Chicago. Ladies and gentlemen, please Google Barbara Proctor, Proctor. The name of the agency is Proctor and Gardner. You will be delighted, excited, and thrilled to know about this iconic figure of women in advertising with a multi-million dollar company that started in the 70s. A lone wolf and an eagle who is the wind beneath our wings. So tonight, I am now going to introduce you to our moderator, and our moderator is Candace D. Queen. She is a multidisciplinary designer, creative director, and educator rooted in advancing racial equity and reinvigorating communities through design and nourished by a passion for creating spaces, cultural, archival, and preservation. She's a member of the Snapchat US Creative Council and a fellow of the NAACP's Next Gen program. Candace has been recognized as one of the 4A's 100 people who made advertising great. There, she received a Bill Sharp Honoree Award, which is no small thing. Bill Sharp was one of the early pioneers in the National Association of Market Developers, and opened the doors in the 70s, 60s, maybe even the 60s. So that Bill Sharp Award honoree is no small thing. And an Ad Color Future and recipient of Ad Color's Unsung Hero Award. I can tell you so much more, but I can tell you that you will get to know Candace a little today and her leadership skills and why we chose her to lead this conversation. Candace, thank you so much for being here for MOBY. We welcome you, and I'm going to leave the presence of this broadcast and come back at the very end. Thank
Awesome.
you
Thank
very
you
much.
so
My
much.
name is Yvette Moyo.
Thank you so much, Yvette. Well, welcome everyone. I'm so excited to have two dynamic creative powerhouses join us for a thoughtful conversation on creative storytelling. Tonight, we're going to discuss what that means to them both professionally and personally. First, I'd like to introduce Valerie Graves. Valerie was named one of the 100 best and brightest by Advertising Age, and is a nationally recognized creative director of an array of Fortune 500 accounts, including General Motors, Ford Motor Company, Bank of America, AT&T, go on and on and on. She broke barriers in advertising as one of the first Black copywriters at BBDO, Kenyon and Eckert, and JWT. She went on to an award-winning career as Chief Creative Officer at Uniworld and Vigilante Leo Burnett Agencies. She was a senior VP of creative services at iconic Motown Records and also a creative consultant to President Bill Clinton. Her memoir of her advertising career, Pressure Makes Diamonds, is an official selection of the 2017 Penn World Voices International Festival and winner of the 2017 African American Literary Award. A recipient of the 2019 President's Award from the Advertising Club of New York and the 2007 AdColor Legend Award, Ms. Graves is currently a creative consultant to the Partnership for Drug-Free Kids and sits on the steering committee of MPART, the landmark diversity initiative at the Advertising Club of New York, where she served on the board of directors for 16 years. Truly a legend. I could spend the whole hour reviewing her accolades, so I'll direct you to her website, ValerieGravesBook.com, to learn more about her. And then to round out the conversation, we have Deadra Rahaman, VP of Brand Planning at Huge Midwest. She's a big vision dot connecting solutions builder with over 15 years of industry experience. Deadra brings a hybrid background between the worlds of strategy, cultural insights, and client relationships. She draws on her unique experiences and perspectives in leading humans, campaigns, experiences, inspiring ideas, and others. Prior to joining Huge, she launched Society Redefined Consulting, partnering with agencies to provide brand strategy, planning, and cultural insight services. She also worked at shops like Spike BBB, Jack Morton Worldwide, Global Hue, where she was responsible for supporting both national and global brands such as Ad Council, JBL, NYPD, Chevrolet, Cadillac, and US Navy. And I apologize, I live next to a fire station. So
no worries.
So welcome. I know we're waiting. There's Valerie.
Here she is.
So we have everyone. The legend. We're gonna wait on you.
The legend, right?
So to kick things off and really set the tone for this, I know it's always really interesting, especially it's Women's History Month. This would really be great to dive a little bit deeper into y'all's history in the ad industry. So I'll open it up with this question. Could you describe the moment or series of moments that led to you realizing you had a story to tell and advertising was the space to tell it in?
Well, I think that I was one of those people who was sort of born a copywriter. I was that person who was always just doing stuff, as a child, always writing, creating, because frankly, I got a lot of positive feedback for doing that. So I think like the idea that I was going to do something creative, probably something that had to do with words and writing and making stuff up, was probably something that was born in childhood. My actual entry into advertising wasn't that kind of an epiphany. I was an English major. I had a small child, so I could not leave my support system in Michigan for taking care of Brian. And I thought, well, what do you do if you've majored in English liberal arts? And in the Detroit area,
those choices basically were publishing or advertising. And there was big time advertising in the area where I lived. I mean, we were the world headquarters of Darcy, which became DMB&B. So that's how I chose advertising as opposed to some other creative pursuit. But I was kind of a natural to the profession. It's the kind of thing I had always done.
Yeah, I think it's interesting just understanding that I feel like everyone has a winding way in. More younger generations, like there's a clear degree plan now, but when you look at, the innovators and the pioneers, it was definitely a lane you had to craft for yourself. Deadra, I'd love to know more about your journey.
My journey, like you said, it's the winding. I didn't even know really that there was an industry, in advertising. And it was, I'd always worked in, project management and marketing on the brand side, but never ever thought about an advertising agency. And I too, it was when I was home, thought I was ready to be a stay-at-home mom when I had my children. And then an opportunity, from a friend who was like, hey, we have an opening role at Global Hue. I think you'd be great for it. You should check it out. And then the thing that really intrigued me is, throughout my, I had worked at American Express and, energy companies. I had never worked in any place where a Black man owned an agency or owned anything, So for me, what was really intriguing was I want to go work somewhere for someone that looks like me, I want to see what this is like. So after, interviewing at Global Hue, landed the gig, and I still never connected, me personally telling stories or me having a voice. I didn't connect it even then. It didn't come to me until later on, as I moved in my career, and that's when I started. And when I started moving more towards strategy, and that's when I started to connect that my experiences mattered, and then my perspective and how I saw the world, that it mattered.
So you mentioned, you didn't have. At first, you didn't know that you really had a way to tell your story, or that it even was a thing. And so I would ask, just looking at your careers collectively, has there ever been a time where you felt you kind of had to limit yourself in industry, or you've been directed to more so minimize yourself and how you navigated through that?
Oh, well, in my case, excuse me, you could describe my first few years in advertising as my life as a white guy. I started in advertising in cars as an experiment. The creative director on Pontiac just sort of said, we got those two girls, myself and a woman named Beverly Okada, who also ended up in New York. What if I put those two girls on Pontiac on the car account? So I started my first account. I was working with 22 white men and one Asian woman, and no one had any interest in my perspective as a Black person, certainly. They kind of hired me because they saw that I could do the job. And it was a time when there was a climate of affirmative action, not out of the goodness of their hearts, but because the government was saying to them, you won't be able to go after big government accounts unless you have a diversity, which wasn't the term then, but that you have to have at least some representation of the communities that represent the United States. So that's how I ended up getting into the business. I had to prove to them that I could write, but they certainly had no interest in my perspective, my story. As a Black person, as a Black woman, they barely were interested in what we had to say as women. I mean, we went into that group with the perception that women don't even buy cars by themselves. They take a man with them and buy whatever car the guy decides they should buy. So having authenticity. I was listening to Deadra's story, and I was thinking, boy, we think often that things haven't changed, but they really have. I mean, first of all, to go to a global hue, there was no such thing. When I got into the business, Uniworld and Carol H. Williams and Carolyn Jones Advertising, Mingo Jones, had been formed, but they were small and, kind of fledgling enterprises. So they were barely there. So yeah, I wasn't telling my story because nobody was interested in my story at all. And I was too busy thinking, wow, I work in advertising, which was more like a dream for me, and just trying to figure out how to keep that job and get along with all those guys.
Yeah. Deadra, what about you?
I was going to say, Valerie, you're right. Like at Global Hue, it was at that time, if you can imagine, we had Chrysler, Verizon, and Walmart all at the same time. And that was like, that had never been done before. It was pretty epic. And to, my prior work history had always, been, one or two Black people, but to walk into an agency and everyone's diverse, Hispanic, African American, Asian, like everyone under one roof, it was really, a great time, I have to say. It was a great time. But when you talk about, those who hold you back, it wasn't until I went to the general market agency and, and you're held back. I was told directly from another woman, I should scale back my confidence, to make others comfortable. Yeah. So,
I heard that one.
Yeah. When you leave, a multicultural agency, where you can be your whole self, and where your opinion, matters because you're looked at for those that's as a subject matter expert. Then when you go to a general market agency and you're told, push back. And that's where, I was really told that, we don't really want you to think, we just kind of want you to do. And, and while it was a great opportunity, I got to work on, a global initiative, and I got to travel, all over the world. And it did help with my perspective, and that's when I started to see the influence of Black culture in other parts of the world, and then that's what helped to shape my perspective. And then that's when I was like, okay, the way we market to each other and the way we message, our influence is much bigger than just right here in America.
Yeah. No, go ahead, Valerie.
It's just interesting how our experiences are this kind of crazy mirror. Mm-hmm. My journey was the opposite of yours. I was one of those few, I was the only at the first 2 or 3 advertising agencies that I worked at BBDO Detroit. I was the only Black person in the company. There wasn't, a word processor or anybody in the mail or anything like that. So I really cut my teeth on big general market accounts, although I was too junior to be doing any of the traveling or anything like that. But my big opportunity, and it was a big risk, and I knew it, to go to Uniworld. But that's where the real opportunity came for me, because as you speak of Global Hue, people would say, where are you going? When I was going to Uniworld, and they'd say an agency called Uniworld, and they never heard of it. I mean, who are their clients? Oh, well, Burger King, AT&T, 7-Up, on and on and on. It was the best client list. We had a car account who had General Motors at that time too. So they had this incredible list of clients that made me feel like, well, okay, I'll take a chance. But mostly they had Byron Lewis, who said, come and work for me, essentially, and you will be someone. You will be, as much as you possibly can be. So the opportunities to travel widely, work in other countries, that kind of thing, those all came to me because I was working for a multicultural agency. Ditto a place in the industry, that kind of seat at the table, which mystifyingly to me, I hear Black people say, oh, I don't want to be, in that Black seat. It's like, well, you're not getting any other seat. They got no seat for you. So, all of those opportunities came to me because I went to a multicultural agency and became, instantly sort of an expert in that area because of life experience piled on top of the experience that I had gained in general market agencies.
Yeah.
And that, you're right. That type of where you're able to, really walk into yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And, and like I said, the trade-off for me was, okay, I'm traveling, all over the world,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm held back, or I can't be too much of this or too much of that. Yep. So that's when, when the opportunity came from Spike DDB, I was like, yeah, I'm going to go where I can think.
Go home.
Right. I'm going to go where I can think and, and apply all the things that I've learned. And I missed being in, a full service creative agency also. And I missed that. And that's where I was just like, yeah, okay, this was great, but I'm going to go, like you said, where I feel like I'm at home and, and where I can be, all the things that I, feel think that I want to be or even want to try to be, and so that's when I did that because like you said, when someone lets you know that, no, you do matter, no, we do want to hear, what you have to say. And that's where I went.
And when you got to those points where you felt like you could be, your whole self, you could really pour into stories that really mattered to you. Looking back, what was like the first campaign where you were like, I get it now. Like, I feel like I'm making an impact. I feel like I'm making a change through this storytelling.
I have to say it was definitely AARP. So it was, you don't have to be so strong. And if and it was targeting, African-American caregivers. And so that phrase, you don't have to be strong. We talk about that, as Black women, always being seen as strong. I think for us, just the research process, the focus group process just was so revealing. And a lot of things I could connect to my own personal experience. I'm originally from Louisiana. And we were describing, this caregiver. I was like, oh my God, like we're started as a young age, Yeah. And you don't even know that you're being groomed to be a caregiver. I remember my grandmother telling me, go sit with your Aunt Ola, and I'd be like, go sit. Like, what am I supposed to do? Just go sit, but I didn't know, because I'm like 10, but I didn't know. But as we started, going through that research and the focus groups, I started making those connections. And I was like, we are groomed as a community, to care for our seniors, because we cherish our grandparents and our parents. And so I think just that whole campaign was really from the research to focus to the creative to even the process of the creative, even for the actual creatives who worked on it, it was a process. And I think it was just one of the best campaigns that I got to work on.
Well, for me, there are two things that stand out, and they both happened practically the second I walked into Uniworld. And really, the moment I walked into Uniworld, I knew it was just like, oh, this is it for me. I will probably never go back to general market advertising because of that sense of being at home, of being where your intelligence is presumed. It also just happened that I joined Uniworld right at the time that I was named one of the 100 best and brightest by Ad Age magazine, and that just impressed Byron Lewis no end. And he's the sort of person that if he's impressed with you, he's going to make everybody in the company impressed with you. So it was just a great situation for me. And the work that I was doing, it was just like, oh my God, they've turned me loose to tap into this wellspring of everything that I know about Black people. The very first assignment that I did for Uniworld was a campaign for Kraft General Foods in support of historically Black colleges and universities. And so we tapped into a lot of things, but one of them that I will never forget is that my elementary school was Mary McLeod Bethune Elementary School. And one of my teachers early on just sat us down and read to us the biography of Mary McLeod Bethune. So I knew that story, and I knew how she started Bethune-Cookman College by selling sweet potato pies. So there was even a food connection to that campaign, which led to, an ad about Booker T. Washington. And no, I'm sorry, not Booker T. Washington, George Washington Carver, and peanuts and everything that he invented from the lowly peanut. But it was just great. It was like suddenly here was all this stuff. I just knew it. I did some research. I went up to the Schomburg and looked up some stuff, but it was just stuff that I knew. Here was, the story that Mrs. Gibson had read to us that I could use in advertising. That was amazing. And the other piece of work was still one of my favorite commercials that I've ever done. I'm proud to say I was able to give Cuba Gooding Jr. his first job ever because there was a scene in this commercial where the guy had to put a parrot on his shoulder, and the guy we originally cast was afraid of the bird. I mean, that probably was too. It was a big old bird, and Cuba was like, "Give it to me, and I'll do it." But it was a commercial called Fashion Statement, and tying into the essence of Burger King's brand, which was "Have It Your Way." It was that no one else is as original, as creative as you. Therefore, what other burger can there be for you except Burger King? And that was just the beginning of bringing insight that was as natural as breathing to brand advertising, and many times we were kind of under assault by our white counterparts, the general market counterparts. They would decide they wanted our business, but they could never beat us. My saying is, you'll never out-Black me. And it was a forum for you. You cannot out-Black me, no matter how hard you try, no matter how much money you have to beat me some other way.
Yep.
So
that's goals though, to be responsible for leveraging and laying the foundation for someone's acting career. That's goals. Thinking about both of your respective stories that you just shared, the commonality was you pulled a lot from your upbringing, your background. So one big thing now that, we're really focused on, especially within the Black community, I think all the communities that would be considered othered, is being more accountable for addressing the diversity within our diverse community, right? And so when you're looking, at a campaign that especially targeting towards just as, for example, the Black market, right? And how do you essentially make sure that you're approaching shaping those narratives when they reside well beyond your perspective and your life lived as a Black person? How do you ensure that that untold narratives get included in the conversation?
You want me to start? One of the things I was fortunate to do in my work history was work both African American and Hispanic. So it's, when we start to talk about culture, and when we start to talk about where it intersects, and what we have in common, that those are the things that I can draw on, pretty confidently. And when I am working in those environments, luckily, we've had that environment, not say at, the general marketing agency, but at the multicultural agency, we had that representation, we had all those voices at the table. But if I'm not having that voice at the table, I will ensure that we do. Even now in my current role, we have a very diverse workforce at Huge. And if it's something that I feel like I don't know, I know there's someone at the agency that I can go to and ask. However, empowering those others and encouraging them to show up and to share their voice, because I don't want to talk about, I don't want to be the only one saying, well, typically if I'm listening to, Spanish speaking TV, is because I'm 9 times out of 10, I'm sitting with my abuela, and so therefore that's why I'm listening to it. But once I leave and maybe if I go hang out or something, everything is in English. I don't want to be the only one saying it, I need those, who are from those backgrounds to speak up and, this is you're a subject matter expert. You need to be comfortable with that. So those are one of the things that I always encourage. And then, I'm pretty, I speak up a lot. So I think everybody kind of knows what they're getting, So I think everyone knows that I am going to make sure there's representation, regardless, I'm going to call it out. And I'm going to just, be that person at the table, because I think at this point, I think everybody kind of knows.
Yeah. Have you ever had a moment where you identified someone that you felt could be like the subject matter expert on something, and they leaned back? I see this especially, I don't know much, I don't have a lot of strategy stories or a lot of creatives. I have a lot of creative stories, but a lot of account stories. But from a creative perspective, sometimes we'll get afraid to lean in because we don't want to get pigeonholed into only doing the quote unquote Black work. Like, have you ever experienced, someone leaning back from that? And if someone was leaning back, what would you tell them?
I recently did that. I schedule one-on-ones a lot, but I do encourage and say, I don't want to be the only one, speaking up. I've been there, I've done that, and like you said, you get pigeonholed, or you're the one that's like, they're like, oh, here she go again, and I don't want to be the only one. I need that backup. So I push, I do a little, nudging, to those who are uncomfortable, and start, like, okay, it is okay. We're in a moment that, where we can really, take up space, so what I try to do is encourage others, to be uncomfortable, but to still take up space, because this is that opportunity. This is that moment, where you actually can.
I think we all get tired. We all get tired. But in general, I feel that and I'm the only one I can speak for, can't just shut up. There are times when I'm telling myself to shut up while I'm talking, but I just can't do it because it isn't really all just about me. My life experience represents groups of people, in various ways. And I'm not saying that anybody else has to feel a responsibility to speak up for anyone else, but I personally do, but I've been pigeonholed in so many ways. It's just ridiculous to me. I am a person who would write a song for a commercial and sing it in the presentation. So then I was the music person, and then I was this person who could only do X, Y, or Z, but that was all out in the general market. Oh, if you want this kind of spot, you want Valerie, but I just ignored it and continued to do whatever work I did. I did want to address your first question, though, about the diversity within Blackness. Mm-hmm. because I'm from the Detroit area. So basically, most of the people that I grew up around were Black Southerners, Southerners whose families had come north to work in the auto factories. And there was that kind of homogeneity going on. Then I moved to New York, and I found I didn't have to really make any kind of an effort to discover the diversity within the Black community because I was working with them. This person who is Black over here is from Panama. Miriam Moulet is actually a Black Hispanic person. They were right there at Uniworld. And Uniworld was curated personally by Byron Lewis in the years when I first joined it. So he may have had those things in mind, or it may have just sparked something within him when he heard that, oh, this guy's Black, but he's Panamanian. So there were all kinds of perspectives all around me. Caribbean people were ubiquitous. There was a time when we did work for AT&T in Jamaica. Part of my awful job was that I had to go to Jamaica every year for a shoot. So diversity within our community was kind of built in. And although it wasn't anything I had particularly experienced before I moved to New York, it came very natural to me. Black people tend to always have more in common than we do that separates us. I felt very at home in Ghana and in Senegal and in South Africa, because there is something about Blackness that you will have in common.
Definitely agree. So pivoting over to right now, what's happening, this past summer was definitely super intense. Dealing with the pandemic has definitely shaken the world. And I'm curious, to just get an idea of your perspectives on how ad agencies, whether multicultural or general market, how, from your lens, how storytelling has shifted or has had to shift, with us having to be more digitally focused, more virtual, from your lens on the work that you've seen, the work that you've been a part of, from what has been the biggest impact and the biggest change compared to the work that you've done prior?
For me, so I'm, huge. We're a user-centric digital agency, and what I'm seeing in terms of how we're starting to connect, and we saw it, right, in real time, during the pandemic, and it just kind of proved what we've been saying about digital is personal, right? Mm-hmm. Like, the way you message, the way, we're getting so hyper-focused on data, and targeting that we can get very personal in our messaging with consumers. So, but the weird thing is that data is allowing you to get personal, but the weird thing was data was pulling agencies and brands further away from the human part of that human consumer, and it was really weird. I kept saying, I was like, data is supposed to make us smarter, but data was making us smart, but we started pulling away from just that human centric focus on messaging to consumers. So to me, it's like now I think we can finally start to go in the right direction with data. And then with data, you can't just dump data. It has to have context. It has to have relevance. You've got to have those insights. That's what you wrap the data up in. So I think we're finally going in that right direction to where we can stop, these fumbles that we're seeing brands make, if you've got, the people at the table to start to pull away, from detaching the human centric side with the data, because it does go together. So those are the things that I'm seeing. But I do think that we got to get back to the context and relevance. Like those things are super important because you got to have your ear to the ground. You got to know what's going on. And you just got to understand, like, especially with the new majority consumer, right?
Yeah.
So our new consumer is multicultural, you know, and so you need to have that relevance and context there.
Well, full disclosure, I haven't worked in an advertising agency in years. I do some advertising work if a client like the NBA, for example, approaches me from time to time to do work for them, then I do that. So I have kind of the luxury of being an informed subject and observer of where advertising is going. And I do think about, what I think about the direction of things. And one thing is clear to me. Quincy Jones said, it all starts with a story or a song. And that's true. And the rise of, like new forms of an entirely new medium like the internet really just is an opportunity to dimensionalize a story or a song. And I think that ties into what Deadra was just talking about. That's the human part of advertising. That's the part that motivates people. And working for so many years in multicultural, where celebrating the consumer and what the consumer cares about is just as important as celebrating the product. Because it's how you sell us stuff, is by showing that you really understand how we feel and what we care about. That remains unchanged. Yeah. I'm excited about the idea of bringing more dimension to things. This is just exciting the way I'm sure that radio excited people when they only had newspapers and magazines, and then television took over from that. And then, so the rise of digital communication is very exciting to me, just because it adds another dimension. Experiential advertising has always interested me too, especially after I went to Uniworld, where people don't really give Byron Lewis the credit that he deserves for practically inventing integrated marketing, because he had no media. He could only put an ad in Ebony and Jet, and Essence was founded the same year as Uniworld. So he had to find other ways to communicate with African-American consumers, and then later Hispanic consumers as well, and then ultimately the general market. So we were always kind of thinking that way. We were not just limited to traditional media. So, I'm very excited about the possibilities of digital. The fact that digital does allow you to get very personal and very targeted and specific with people, although I think to some extent too much.
Yeah, it's like I'm talking on the phone with my sister, and I'm like, I love this couch. I saw a picture of it in a biography with Marilyn Monroe. I get on Facebook, and
there it is.
Yeah, it kind of makes you feel spied upon.
Yeah,
and I think that's a kind of shakeout that will happen. It's a learning curve. It's like, the entire advertising industry and process went digital over the course of my career. And one of the first things that you learn is just because you can doesn't mean you should, in terms of ways to communicate with people. But I find it all exciting. I'm glad I don't have the pressure of absolutely having to keep up with everything all the time. But I think I kind of understand it. I recently kind of creative directed / produced an online event called 50 Years in the Groove for New Federal Theater, where I'm on the board. And the idea was so complex. The elements of it were so complex, where we had, like 2 DJs, one who's a legendary mixer of music and dance party kind of guy who was playing music from the era of when the theater was founded. Another one who was doing in-studio interviews with the founder of our theater. We had shout outs coming in from people who had been associated with the theater in the years of its founding, people like Susan Taylor, on and on and on. But it was so complicated that it was very difficult to explain. And after it was successfully concluded, and it was the jam, I'm sure you guys didn't see it, and I'm sorry you missed it. But people were telling me, I didn't understand this. When you were trying to explain how all of these elements were going to fit together and how this was all going to work, I didn't really get it, but I just thought I wouldn't say anything, and we'd see what would happen. That's exciting to me.
Yeah.
That's exciting to me. It's a high wire act. I understood it. I hoped that all this stuff was going to work out the way that I was telling him it was going to. And in the end, it did. And it was just great.
I like getting to that aha moment with any kind of client that they're not tracking exactly, or they want to do something like super literal, but when they can trust you, and you get that aha moment in the long run, it's always a good reward. Mm-hmm. We have some questions coming in, but before we pivot over, I have two more that I want to shoot over y'all's way. This one, Deadra, this is for you. Huge. I'm gonna do it. I'm just a joke. Huge. That's a huge, powerful new initiative to reframe the conversation around defunding the police. I think mastering the narrative here is just such an essential, important task, and one to get your perspective and see if you can share more context about the initiative and talk a little bit about the desired outcome for this.
Well, this was an initiative that kicked off way before I got to Huge. And so it was, of course, during the height of, George Floyd and everything that was going on. And then, of course, the open letter, to the industry from 600 and Rising. The Huge team, put out like a call to action. So there were like 36, I want to say, briefs that were submitted. And the defund to refund was the winning brief. So, what was really, I think, as I'm an insider, but, an outsider looking at the project, I think it was, something that spoke to a lot of people who understood that this narrative, and, back to what Valerie's talking about, storytelling, this narrative needed storytelling. It needed, to put that human, component in it. And so the team, which is an amazing team that worked on this, they put their blood, sweat, and tears into this, gave up their weekends, to pull it off because they still had their regular jobs. But what they wanted to do was just change the narrative, or the stigma behind, defunding the police, and apply actual real human stories, to potentially change hearts and minds about how we think about, the term. And I think they did a brilliant job of taking that. And it was a diverse team. But to have that insight and to have that connection to it, and then to be able to bring it to life, in the way that the team did, I think is a brilliant idea. And I am just riding, I'm just in their, in their atmosphere, riding a wave, and just supporting them, where I can, and, meeting with them on a regular basis. And the desired outcome is really, ultimately they want to partner with an organization to bring it even further. We're still doing, some media behind it. Recently, Blavity, there was another, so they got Adweek and Blavity did a story on it. But ultimately, the team wants to partner with an organization to really bring it to life. And what they're doing is also taking those real life scenarios. Like, for instance, how does it actually work? How does that actually work? And then how does that actually help the community? And so they're taking those real life stories. And so if they could, if we can find an organization to partner with us on that, that would just be icing on the cake. So that would be the desired outcome.
Awesome. I think it's just it's literally a life-changing cause, a life-saving cause.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is the direction as agencies look to be active allies, whether you're multicultural or general market, as you look to like strive and make change, having some sort of actionable, direct impact is like so important. And to close this out before we pivot over to the Facebook questions, my last question would be, when you look collectively at your career and you look at what's on the horizon for yourself, what do you want your creative legacy to be?
Valerie, you want to go first?
I really want my creative legacy to be about the creative directors that I've been able to help create. That's when I look back on a career, it's not any award or honor or achievement. I appreciate everything that has come my way, but after a while, it's just a stack, of things. But when I look and see from the internship program that we had for 1 year at Uniworld, that 2 of our 4 interns are chief creative officer or creative director level. Our failure was that Reggie Hudlin was one of our interns, and he left before he completed the program because he went to make house party. But that's all right, because Boomerang, y'all, is loosely inspired by Uniworld, and I have that from the creator's mouth. But that's what's important to me now. It's like, how many other people did I help to bring into advertising? Whose careers did I help to facilitate? Who did I manage to give some benefit of the things that I've learned in my long career, both things that have to do with creativity and production and all of that, but also just how to navigate the advertising industry. I have a whole cadre of young people in this business that I'm just sort of personally connected to. And it's really the joy of my professional life right now. So I guess that's just the truth. I'd like to be remembered as a really influential creative director. Mm-hmm. But the most important part of creative direction for me was the number of creative directors that I have had something to do with them becoming that,
Love that.
Thank you.
I think for me, for a while I was consulting, and I really didn't, I was just like, I'm just going to do this and be at home and enjoy life and stop traveling and all that stuff. But one of my mentees, she made me be a mentor. Like, I didn't even think about mentoring, but she's a young advertising professional, and she just like you are going to be my mentor. And I'm like, okay. So by her doing that, I think it made me realize that I didn't have mentors, but it made me realize. And then, Valerie, you're hearing, if you're hearing similar stories from me, then I started hearing similar stories from them, about some of the same challenges that, we're facing in the industry. And it just kind of lit a fire where I was just like, what, we're still dealing with this, and so not only do I mentor her, it's there are more. And ultimately, what I think I figured out, my goal is really, and the reason why I returned back to agency, because I felt like I could do more back on the inside than I could on the outside. But my goal really is to see more of us in leadership positions, more Black women. There's one of my former account soup. She's now a VP at Leo Burnett. There's one at Snapchat. And I'm working with so many, connecting so many women who are trying to move the needle in the industry. And so ultimately, that's my what I want to leave behind. I want to leave behind, you know, other young women in this industry who could look to me, you know, first one is representation to see where they can go, you know, in the industry, and then to be connected to each other, you know, and to and then I'm encouraging them now to mentor. So that's what I started to just kind of crystallize to me in the past like couple of years, that using my voice and taking the hits and the sacrifices that go along with it, I'm willing to do that as long as, you know, more of us, because I think, as you know, the new majority consumer, when we start to talk about marketing, total market is about to become just multicultural marketing.
Yeah.
You know, like, I hate to break it to y'all. I hate to tell y'all that, but you know, this is the direction that we've been going in. And, you know, we are most poised, you know, not only multicultural agencies, but, you know, Black creatives are most poised, Black and brown creatives are most poised to lead this industry. And the sooner we, you know, wake up to that fact, you know, we start to make moves.
Yeah, when I left Uniworld 15 years ago, it was because I absolutely would not shut up about or abandon that position. You know, we were absolutely, and we had evidence that we were poised. You know, we had won the Three Musketeers AOR. We won against Saatchi & Saatchi, a $100 million assignment to do Burger King General Market creative. And I think that I caught Byron Lewis at the wrong time in his life to be starting something new. And I could not convince the rest of the leadership team, but I absolutely agree with you. You know, who would be any better suited than us to address the new American consumer? And that's been pretty clear for a while.
For a while. Since I was at Global Hue, it was clear.
Yes, that's where their name came from.
We've been trying to tell people since then. Mm-hmm. And since, you know, Valerie, the numbers have been pointing in that direction for a very, very, very long time.
Yes.
Definitely agree. I also really love that the commonality when we talked about legacy is mentorship, because we have a lot of questions, seeking guidance and advice. So I'll dive into the first one. Was there ever a time where you questioned your career path? How did you navigate that time? And I'm assuming yes, at some point.
I never questioned it on my own. I took a flyer from advertising when the late Andre Harrell, you know, God rest his soul, I loved him, offered me a position as Senior Vice President of Creative Services for Motown. Hey, I'm from Detroit. You don't turn down that job. Although, you know, that now, if I questioned a career choice, it was that one. You know, after being in the music industry for just a minute, I realized that, you know, like for a lot of reasons, it really wasn't where I needed to be at that point in my life. For one thing, it was kind of a 24-hour-a-day job. And I really was not willing to give 24 hours a day to the music industry. But once I did my 2 years at Motown, my husband was doing a fellowship at Stanford, so I got a year off after Motown. And then after a brief stint in health advertising, Byron Lewis recruited me back to Uniworld again. So I never questioned it too much on my own, but I did take advantage of an opportunity to try something new. There were things about the music business that I loved, like music and the glamour, but I'm an advertising person. I'm a corporate executive at heart too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, some were forced, like being laid off, and then some was like by choice. Both were rewarding, you know, once you get out of the shock of being laid off, you know, especially when you know, have a family, you start to think, you know, like, I needed this reset, you know. I like being at home, you know. So the ones that were forced, you know, that was fine too. But when I took that time away, after I left Spike DDB, you know, I was tired. You know, there comes a time when you were just really tired. And it's when you need it, you know, you take that time to reevaluate, and then, you know, you get people who are actually paying attention to what you have to say, and then they say you know where you need to go, and then you start saying, well, okay, well, where do I need to go? You know, you start having those conversations with yourself, and you know, I knew that if I were going to return to, you know, agency life, that it needed to be really the right place for me. You know, and it, you know, any agency that launches something like, you know, defund or refund is, I'm like, okay, I'm where I'm supposed to be.
So another question that rolled in was, what does "to whom much is given, much will be required" mean to you in your professional career?
Well, I think I've sort of answered that.
Yeah.
You know, I feel it's not just an obligation, it's a joy. I think in some ways I'm kind of a natural teacher too. So it's not a burden to me to do that. A lot of the things that I took on as a chief creative officer in the industry, working with the Advertising Council for many years, for example, working with the Advertising Club to try and increase the diversity of its membership, things like that. They felt a little bit like duties. Partnership for a Drug-Free America, you know, because like almost everyone, you know, you less than 1 degree of separation from someone with a drug problem. So that felt like sort of an obligation too, but I enjoyed the work. And we did both my agency doing creative for the partnership, and also just as a reviewing creative director sitting around that table and getting to influence there and at the Ad Council work that was designed to really change people's lives, give people hope or help people solve problems, that kind of thing. It never really felt like that much of an obligation. When I stopped doing all those things, because I kind of semi-retired and started writing a book, I realized like how much time it really takes and how much you become used to just kind of scheduling yourself in these increments of, you know, 1 or 2 hours, and flitting around, you know, in taxis and flying around and, you know, just doing whatever. Yeah, it can get demanding, but after it just becomes your life. You know, after a certain point, you don't even notice it so much until after you're not doing it anymore.
Totally.
I probably would have never thought about that phrase until maybe 2-3 years ago. I get it now. I believe that my job really is to make it better for the Black women coming behind me. I don't want them to experience some of the things that I experienced. You know, I do believe that is my job, you know, as I ride out and plan for retirement. Hopefully, you know, soon. I still got to get people to college, but it is a responsibility. It's not a burden, but it is a responsibility. And that's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. My mindset is leave the space as best you can better than you left it, and better for whoever's coming behind you, so they don't have to hit their same roadblocks, you know. There's this other question. I feel like y'all both kind of already shared how you overcame resistance and disinterest in your personal perspectives as Black women and as creatives. What advice, to close this out, what advice would you give to young creatives creatives who are, you know, at the crux of their next, you know, their next step, who are battling with that issue right now? What advice would you give them?
I've been telling everybody, just take up all the space, take all the opportunity, you know, don't hold back. You know, even if you are, you know, where you're like, well, they're just listening to me now because, you know, of everything that's going on. I'm like, okay, so what? You know, take up all the space. If they're listening to you and you are now, you know, having an impact, then, you know, what's the problem? So yeah, my thing is take up space, take those opportunities, even if you are the only one, and use your voice. Like, I am not here to hold back for anything or anybody. Use your voice, because right now they need to hear it.
Yeah.
You know, they need to hear it. And so, you know, don't hold back. Don't, what's the term? Don't dim your light just to make everybody else uncomfortable, you know, just to be uncomfortable.
You know, I think that's wonderful advice. But I think it's somewhat dependent upon a person's ability to fully comprehend what you are saying, you know, because one person is going to take that as a license to say whatever they want to say, you know, with whatever attitude they want to bring with it. And that doesn't always necessarily work in your favor. I do believe that you should not dim your light, but I think that you should look at whether that light is a blowtorch or something, you know, that you're putting out there. Wow. There was something more I wanted to say, but I just got hung up a little bit on that because I see that with people who are very young, and even with people who are, you know, like kind of mid-career, that there is a need to choose which battles you want to fight.
Yeah.
You don't want to always be out there with a flamethrower, you know. At the same time, what I was going to say before you gave your answer, Deadra, was that, you know, you need to realize that they're not doing you a favor by having you there, you know, which is kind of, I think that's a battle we have to fight with ourselves, you know, because we're so happy to have made progress and to have careers of this type, all of that. But you're only there because they need you, you know. You are bringing something that is very valuable to the party, and that is what I would say is like, know your worth, know your value, and that's not just in the vein of I am somebody. It's like, well, this company needs me, because if I weren't here, you know, they wouldn't know anything about X, Y, or Z that I bring to the party. And I think you can wear that and wear it proudly. And I take what you said in the spirit that I know you offered it, but I hope that that's true of the audience too, you know, that they're not feeling that they always have to be at war, you know, at work, because that's not going to be a real satisfying experience. And it's not necessarily, I mean, you're going to find yourself sometimes without a job. I stood up at a big company dinner once where everybody was being funny while introducing themselves, and called myself a token. And I was a token. I was the only Black person in the whole company. And the next day, the CEO stopped by my office in the morning and went, a token, huh? You know, and 2 weeks later, I was laid off. So you have to realize, as a good friend of ours, the late Les Payne, said, you know, you tell the truth and then duck, you know, because that's real too. So I hope that your advice is taken. I really do offer the same perspective, but it's like, you know, think too while you're doing it. Don't just, you know, full speed ahead at all times, you know.
Yeah. Be strategic in every move, every move you make.
Yeah.
As much as you can, because sometimes you're just going to call yourself a token at the big company dinner. And what it is, and you know, they just have to deal with it, you know.
Well, this was a really, really wonderful conversation. I know both of you via social media. We never really interacted that much. It was just so nice we're able to like actually have a conversation and learn so much about you and share your stories with the MOBE audience. So I'll turn it over to Yvonne or Yvette to close this out. And again, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom.
Oh,
Thank you so much, Candace.
Great moderator.
Finally,
Nice to meet you. And you too, Deadra. And I know you're not nervous now, right?
I'm a little warm.
Candace, you did a great job. You did a great job.
Thank you.
I was nervous,
yes,
y'all.
I'm sure you're warm.
Val is a legend,
I've been
y'all.
in that seat. Your last name is Queen. You can handle it because these are two stars of the industry. I love the conversation. I'm just putting myself personally into being in awe of each of you. Valerie Graves, you are like the Judith Jameson of the industry in advertising. You move with grace. I remember at the SIBA Awards, if this were, I mean, for real, if you guys, Deandra and Candace, could have been growing up in the industry when this session would have been a huge ballroom in New York, filled with people, and Uniworld Group and Burrell and on and on and on, award after award. And I know, Valerie, how many SIBA awards did you receive from Uniworld or from anywhere?
It kind of depends on how you count them. At one time I only had like 15 that were mine, where I actually, was the writer on them. There were other things where I was a creative director, or, something like that. But Uniworld had just a trophy case full of SIBAs. The first work I ever did for Uniworld, which was freelance for an AT&T campaign, actually won a SIBA. So I had one before I actually joined a multicultural agency. So I'm pleased about that.
Yeah,
it was.
So the SIBA,
the closest thing to it is Ad Color now, but it was our advertising family reunion. Everyone was there.
Yes, and that's where I met you, and it was a beautiful time to see ourselves on film, on TV, all the time, and all the best experiences of being Black on TV came from these agencies. And I have to give a shout out to Anna Morris at Burrell Advertising. And Emma Young, who
and
are
Carol.
also iconic. Okay, Carol H. Williams, we honored her yesterday at the beginning of our session. So be sure and go to our YouTube channel, the MOBE Symposium YouTube channel, and you can actually see what we said about Carol H. Williams. And it wasn't enough. It's never enough. But I can't even say enough tonight. I will recap a few things that I thought were just precious. I was going to say gems, and I also want to mention Valerie's book, which is Pressure Makes Diamonds. Is that correct?
Yes.
So when I say gems, I'm serious. The top gem. Valerie has been that in this industry, and what a great name for your book. Let's all go out and get it. Let's have this experience of our a hashtag that we use a lot is Legacy Matters. And also the MOBE legacy is that young people have an opportunity to speak from their heart, to speak from their area of expertise, and we grow. MOBE hopefully accelerates the growth of you in this industry. So we're absolutely inspired by both your careers, Candace and Deandra. And we just a few things that I took note of is that Spike Lee, Spike DDB Needham. I remember when that happened, and it was a earth-shattering situation in the industry. That, especially for us, marketing opportunities in business and entertainment, they got it that they were not going to survive You don't make a move like that if you don't think it's survival. You're not just trying to, do something. You're really trying to survive in an industry where Black culture was moving the world, and it continues to move the world, as we said in this discussion. So that was major. Again, I mentioned the SIBO Awards. Those were awards of African Americans by African Americans, predecessor to the NAACP Awards. And that our culture, I just want to mention that our culture just drives everything in the world. And so now is a wonderful time in the industry where we are seeing, we have a brand, Real Men Cook, and it's really about the invisible man coming forward in media on Father's Day, so that they can be seen. Who we are has been snuffed out. And if not for these Black ad agencies, we wouldn't even understand that the Black family exists. And we have to bring that back. And I think we have an opportunity to do so. I just thank you for being on the MOBE forum, and hopefully you'll join us tomorrow and the next day as we continue to celebrate women in advertising. At this point, we're going to ask Yvonne to.
Thank you, Yvette. And we will continue our Women in Advertising Week. For tomorrow, Thursday, March 4th, we'll be doing advertising sales. Follow the money. Advertising is the backbone of media, and sure, people enjoy football, but the annual anticipation of the Super Bowl is partially built by the expectations of the new commercials. The pandemic sped up the transition of advertising in traditional media towards electronic and social media. We want you to find out how these women are managing sales in the economy and learn the secrets of their success. Judine Walden, head of industry with the Home and Consumer Services at Google, will lead the discussion with Winnie Bernier, who's the VP of Ad Sales at Bounce TV, along with Lori Flowers, Manager Ad Sales Marketing at Radio 1, New York City, and Yesenia Bello, SVP of Diversity and Inclusion at iHeartMedia. We look forward to you joining us again tomorrow evening. Thank you to all of our panelists, and especially the queen, Miss Candace.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you all.